What if the person who once saved your life didn't even know they had? 5 years ago, a broken man stood on the edge of a bridge ready to let go, until a stranger handed him a piece of bread and whispered 5 words that would change everything. He never saw her face. Now that same man, a powerful CEO in disguise, spots a waitress hiding leftover food in her bag. But when he follows her into the rain, what he finds doesn't just stop him in his tracks. It shakes the very foundation of who he is. Because some acts of kindness echo louder than memory. The wind shrieked through the steel girders of the Brooklyn Queens overpass, whipping grit into the eyes of anyone foolish enough to walk that stretch at night. The city lights below flickered through the fog like dying embers, and the air carried that peculiar kind of damp that stuck to your bones. Somewhere between the chaos of honking horns and the silent ache of loneliness, a man stood at the edge of the bridge, motionless breath fogging in the freezing air, eyes vacant. His name was Jack Delaney, 32, CEO on paper, orphaned by tragedy. Just 6 weeks earlier, a drunk driver had taken the lives of his parents, leaving him the sudden inheritor of Delaney's Hearth, a mid-range restaurant chain known more for its cozy booths than its business strategies. Jack hadn't just lost family, he had lost his anchor, his sense of self. And now, staring down into the dark water below, he had convinced himself there was nothing left worth holding on to. But just as his foot began to shift forward, a voice broke the silence. "Hey, wait." Jack turned startled, blinking through the fog. A girl, barely more than 19, stood there out of breath, her red knit scarf trailing behind her like a banner. She didn't say anything else at first. She just stepped forward, gently unwrapping a small paper bag clutched in her hand. From it, she pulled out a piece of warm sourdough, torn and imperfect. She held it out. It's still warm. Jack stared, confused. What? She didn't press. Instead, she placed the bread in his hand and whispered, "Tomorrow is still a gift. Please, don't give it back." And with that, she turned and walked away. Jack looked down at the bread. He could still feel its warmth through the paper. It wasn't the bread that broke him. It was the kindness. So simple, so undeserved, and so perfectly timed. In that moment, he stepped back from the edge, not toward safety, but toward the first breath of something like hope. He never saw her face again. She vanished as quietly as she had arrived. But those 5 words stayed with him. For 5 years. In the time that followed, Jack rebuilt, slowly, painfully. He didn't just grow Delaney's Hearth into a successful brand, he reshaped it, less corporate, more human. But no matter how high the profits climbed or how many new locations opened, one thing nagged at him. He never knew who she was. He never found her. No name, no connection. Just a memory of a girl in a red scarf offering bread to a stranger she didn't know she was saving. That's why one bitter January morning, Jack decided he needed to see his empire from the ground level. No more boardroom briefings. No more HR reports or filtered emails. He needed to feel the floor under his feet, hear the kitchen buzz in real time, and meet the people who carried the heart of his business on tired shoulders. So he shaved his beard, changed his name to Danny, and walked into his Brooklyn flagship restaurant with a forged resume and an apron. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but something inside him whispered, "She's out there. Maybe not the girl, but someone else. Someone like her." And so, the real story began, not on the edge of a bridge, but in the dim clatter of dishes, the steam of boiling pots, and the echo of footsteps across a greasy tile floor. Jack, now going by Danny, felt invisible, which was the point. He spent his first few nights on the closing crew at Delaney's Hearth, mopping floors, hauling trash bags, and wiping down sticky countertops under flickering fluorescent lights. No one questioned who he was. No one looked twice at the new guy. And for Jack, that anonymity was a strange kind of comfort. After years of being the man behind the glass conference doors, he could finally listen without being seen. It was on his 4th night that he noticed her. She was small, slight-framed chestnut hair pulled into a messy bun, moving like she'd memorized every inch of the restaurant. Efficient, quiet, always the first to clock in, always the last to leave. Her name tag read Haley. Jack had seen hundreds of employees come and go, but there was something about her rhythm, her stillness amid the chaos, that unsettled him. She worked with a sort of haunted grace, like someone carrying too much on too little sleep. That night, well past midnight, the kitchen was winding down. The last plates had been scraped. The grill hissed one final breath. Most of the staff had already punched out and disappeared into the icy dark. But Haley lingered. Jack noticed her near the back prep station, her movements oddly quick eyes scanning the corners like she didn't want to be seen. She was wrapping food, leftovers, from cleared plates. Not the untouched stuff from trays headed for the dumpster, but food no one would miss. A chunk of cornbread, a few roasted potatoes, half a grilled cheese. She wrapped it all with care, folding it into napkins like she was packing lunch for someone she loved. Then from beneath the counter, she retrieved an old canvas bag, faded green one strap frayed, and gently tucked the food inside. Jack watched from behind a stack of bus bins. He didn't move, didn't speak. He should have said something. He was the manager on duty technically, but instead he listened. Because that's when she whispered, soft, almost to herself, "If I'm quick, it'll still be warm when I get there." And just like that, Jack's breath caught in his throat. He didn't know why that hit him so hard. Maybe it was the urgency in her voice, or the way her hands trembled, not out of fear, but out of exhaustion. Maybe it was because for a split second her eyes mirrored the same loneliness he once saw in his own reflection on the Brooklyn Bridge. She wasn't stealing. She was rushing. For someone. For something that couldn't wait. Jack stood frozen as she slipped out the side door bag, clutched tightly under her coat. He didn't chase her. He just stood there, haunted. And then somewhere in the farthest corner of his memory, something stirred. A whisper. A voice. A piece of bread pressed into his hand beneath a red scarf. A girl who had vanished before he could say thank you. What if she's like her? What if someone else was out there saving lives in silence with nothing but scraps and compassion? The thought rooted itself so deep, it kept him up all night. By the time the sun rose over Brooklyn, Jack had made a decision. He wasn't going to confront Haley. He was going to follow her. Not out of suspicion, but out of something else. Something like hope. The next night he waited, and when she clocked out around 11:17 p.m., he slipped his apron off and followed her. At a distance, his hoodie pulled tight, staying to the shadows. The streets were slick with frozen drizzle, reflecting the sickly yellow of street lamps. Haley moved fast, cutting down side streets, ducking under scaffolding, never looking back. Then she stopped, turned into a narrow alley behind an abandoned storefront. Jack crept closer, and what he saw hit him like a punch to the chest. There, beneath a sheet of corrugated metal barely shielding them from the wind, sat two children. A boy, maybe 6, a girl younger, curled up under a threadbare blanket. Haley knelt beside them, gently unwrapping the food from her tote. She didn't eat. She didn't speak much. She just tore the bread in half, blew on the soup, and murmured, "Small bites, okay? We've got to make it last." Jack stood frozen behind a dumpster, every instinct in his body screaming with guilt. He had wondered if she was stealing, but she was giving. From the little she had, she was still giving, just like the girl on the bridge. He stayed until the kids fell asleep and Haley kissed their foreheads before slipping back into the night. Jack didn't sleep that night. The image of her soaked coat, her trembling hands, the way she cradled that child's face with nothing but tenderness, it stayed with him, burned into his chest. And he knew without a doubt, he needed to know more, not just about what she was doing, but why. Because sometimes people steal for themselves, but sometimes they save without asking for anything back. The rain hit Brooklyn like a punishment that Thursday night, cold, slicing, relentless. It bounced off windshields, flooded gutters, and turned sidewalks into dark rivers. Jack, still in disguise as Danny, stood under the awning of a shuttered bodega across the street from Delaney's hearth, watching, waiting. Haley had clocked out late again. 11:24 p.m. to be exact. She always walked quickly, shoulders hunched, the same tote bag tucked under her arm like a lifeline. But tonight the weather didn't seem to slow her. If anything, it made her faster. Jack followed from a distance hood, pulled low-soaked jeans clinging to his legs. He didn't even notice the chill. His focus was entirely on her. She crossed the avenue, ducked down the same alley, and disappeared under the same rusty awning. Jack approached slowly. When he reached the edge of the alley, he paused, silent hidden heart pounding. Haley was there, kneeling, her back to him. The two kids, he recognized them now, curled together beneath the same blanket, which was now even more threadbare, the seams unraveling like old promises. The girl coughed softly. The boy shivered. Haley pulled out a small Tupperware of soup, still warm apparently because steam rose faintly in the cold air. She blew on it and offered it carefully to the boy. "Slow sips, all right. It's still hot," she whispered. Then she broke the remaining cornbread in half and handed one piece to each child. "Chew slow. We'll get more soon." Jack couldn't move. His hands were shaking, but not from the rain. This wasn't charity. It wasn't temporary. It was routine. She had done this before. Many times, she had built a ritual around these two children, nurturing them from the shadows night after night, with what little she could rescue from behind the kitchen doors, of a place where no one noticed her leave, late or return exhausted. Jack's eyes dropped to her coat. It was soaked, fraying at the cuffs. Her sneakers squelched in the puddles. Her hair clung to her cheeks in wet strings. And still she smiled at the children, like they were the most precious thing in the world. She never ate a single bite. Jack swallowed hard, stepping back quietly, not out of fear, but out of shame. He had wondered if she was stealing, but she was giving, and he had sat through board meetings about reducing waste, about cutting costs on staff meals. He had signed off on policies that pushed people like her further into the margins. Now he knew the truth. Haley wasn't an employee who stayed late. She was a guardian, and Jack was a fool. The next morning before the restaurant opened, Jack showed up early, still in disguise, still playing Danny. In the prep kitchen, the sous chef was sorting out fresh baguettes and tossing unserved appetizers into the compost bin. "Hey," Jack said, casually wiping down a counter. "Mind setting those aside tonight?" The chef looked up. "Why?" Jack paused. "I think there's a community group nearby. They could use it." The chef shrugged. "That a new policy?" Jack offered a half smile. "Unofficial, for now." And so it began. From that night forward, Haley began finding small containers in the break room fridge, labeled staff extras. Sometimes they held soups or casseroles or sandwiches that hadn't been plated in time for service. Sometimes warm, sometimes not, but always carefully packed. She never asked who left them, but every time, before tucking them into her tote, she whispered almost like a prayer, "Thank you." Jack never answered out loud. He just watched. He started staying behind longer after his shifts. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to be close. He wiped counters just a few feet from where she prepped silverware. He refilled the salt bins when she restocked the dessert trays. They didn't speak much, but there was something between them now, something neither had named. One night, Haley sat down on an overturned milk crate, rubbing her ankle. Her sock was visible through a tear in her sneaker. Jack walked over and handed her a towel. "Tough night?" he asked. She let out a tired laugh. "Only about as tough as a Thursday with wet socks and no tips." He chuckled. "You ever think about quitting?" She shrugged. "Only every other shift." He tilted his head. "So why don't you?" Haley glanced toward the alley, though Jack knew she couldn't see it from here. "Because they need me," she said quietly. "The kids." There was a pause. Then she added almost under her breath, "Someone once saved me, with nothing but bread." Jack's heart nearly stopped. Bread? Again. He looked at her. Really looked at her. He still didn't know the whole story. But something told him. He was closer than he thought. The dining room was almost empty. The last of the customers had drifted out into the foggy night, leaving only the clatter of silverware being stacked and the hum of the dishwashers winding down. Jack, still playing the role of Danny, was elbow-deep in soapy water at the sink when Haley's voice drifted across the room. She was singing softly, barely above a whisper, a tune he couldn't quite place, but it was sweet and steady, and it stopped him in his tracks. He tilted his head. She did that sometimes, sang to herself when she thought no one was listening. He smiled. Then, as if fate had pressed play on a memory, she murmured something. It wasn't part of the song. It wasn't even directed at anyone. But it was everything. "Tomorrow is still a gift," she said as she bent to wipe down a chair. Jack's entire body stiffened. The dish slipped from his hand into the sink with a splash. Haley didn't notice, but he did. Every syllable. "Tomorrow is still a gift." Those were the words. The words. His mind reeled. It wasn't a phrase you heard often. It wasn't cliché. It was exact, intimate, personal. It was hers. The girl on the bridge, 5 years ago. That snowy night, the scarf, the bread, her. He stared at her now across the dining room, her face lit only by the dull overhead lights. The same softness in her voice, the same quiet urgency. It couldn't be coincidence. She hadn't just reminded him of the girl on the bridge. She was the girl on the bridge. Jack's breath caught. He wanted to walk over to her, fall to his knees, confess everything. But how do you tell someone they once saved your life without sounding like a ghost from their forgotten chapter? So instead, he did nothing, just watched her and listened. Over the next few days, Jack began to see her differently. Not as a waitress, not as a mystery, but as someone who had once held him together with nothing but kindness. He noticed how she gave customers extra napkins without being asked, how she took the orders with the most modifications and never complained, how she laughed with the busboys when they were tired, how she always stayed a little longer to double-check the coffee filters for the morning crew. Every gesture was soft, but deliberate, the kind of softness you earn after surviving something hard. One afternoon, Jack asked her casually, "Where'd you learn to cook like that?" She smiled faintly. "From my mom." Before she passed. "I'm sorry," Jack said, meaning it. "It's all right," she replied. "She taught me how to stretch one meal into 3. She used to say, 'There's always someone hungrier than you. Make enough for them too.'" Jack chuckled. "Sounds like a good woman." Haley looked down, her fingers curling around a coffee mug. She was the best. That evening, as they took a break near the back exit, the rain pattering gently outside, Jack sat beside her on a crate, elbows on knees, heart pounding. He thought about telling her then, about the bridge, about the bread. But he didn't, because it wasn't the right time, and he didn't want to turn her kindness into a transaction. Not yet. A few nights later, the restaurant was slow. Rain again, always the rain. Haley moved through the kitchen, humming that same tune, and Jack, quietly matching her rhythm, began to hum it too. She paused, looked up. "You know that song?" she asked, a little surprised. He shrugged, pretending, "Maybe. My mom used to hum it, I think." Haley raised an eyebrow. "Your mom had good taste." Jack smiled. "She did." She smiled back. And then teasingly she added, "So, Danny, what did you do before bussing tables? You're way too clean to be new at this." Jack smirked. "Would you believe me if I said I used to be lost?" She tilted her head. "Like, spiritually." He laughed. "Maybe, definitely geographically, and probably emotionally." Haley chuckled. "So, all of the above." Jack nodded, suddenly serious. "Yeah, all of the above." The laughter faded into silence. But it wasn't awkward. It was something else, a recognition, a thread between them. Jack felt it settle between them, like a shared weight, one he no longer wanted to carry alone. But still he held back, because there are some truths that require the right moment. And this moment, this was for listening, not confessing. It started with a laugh. Just a passing comment in the break room, something 2-line cooks were chuckling about while refilling ketchup bottles. "Man, can you believe it," the taller one said. "CEO goes undercover, dishes mops the whole thing. It's all over the press now. Delaney's hearth, viral marketing genius." The other one smirked. "Danny the dishwasher." "That's him, Jack Delaney?" "You're kidding." "Nope," the first guy said. "Check the video. Same eyes, just no beard. Dude was washing lettuce like his life depended on it." They laughed and walked out. Haley dropped the sugar packet she was holding. It hit the floor and exploded. She didn't move. Her breath caught in her chest. A strange kind of ringing filled her ears. Jack Delaney. The name settled like dust over everything she thought she knew. She had told Danny about her past, her pain, her kids, her fears, her scars, all while he sat there, smiling, nodding, listening, lying. She turned and walked quickly through the kitchen, heart racing. Her palms were clammy, her thoughts spiraling. The things she'd said, the moments they'd shared, the silence that had once felt safe now echoed like betrayal. When she found him, he was by the prep sink, sleeves rolled, rinsing out a tray. He looked up and smiled like he always did. But this time she didn't smile back. Her voice was barely a whisper, but every syllable was sharp. "You're Jack Delaney." He froze. Didn't deny it, didn't dodge it, just nodded slowly. I am. The silence between them cracked open like thin ice. She took a step back. I gave you my truth, she said, her voice trembling while you wore a mask. Haley, No, she cut in firmer now. Don't. You knew everything about me, and I knew nothing about you. I never meant to, but you did, she said, eyes narrowing. You saw me. When I was vulnerable, you watched me feed them. You let me open up to you. You just stood there, playing a part. Jack's throat tightened. I didn't mean to hurt you. Her eyes glistened. Then what did you mean to do? He couldn't answer, because the truth was messy. He had wanted to understand his business, but more than that, so much more than that. He had wanted to understand her, and somehow, in doing so, he had broken the very trust he'd come to honor. I thought you were different, she whispered. Her voice cracked. The first person who didn't look at me like I was broken. He took a step forward. She took one back. Don't, she said, barely above a breath. Just don't. She turned, walking past the hanging pots, past the flickering exit sign, past the warm scent of garlic and thyme that suddenly made her nauseous. Out into the cold night. Gone. Jack didn't follow, because for the first time since he'd met her, he didn't know what to say. He stood there for a long time. The kitchen now felt too bright, too loud, too hollow. The staff moved around him, unaware of the small, quiet rupture that had just split something sacred in two. His heart felt heavier than it had in years. And this time, it wasn't about grief. It was about regret. He hadn't meant to deceive her. He had just wanted to be near her. But now he had become the very thing she'd spent her life trying to survive. Another person who took her trust and gave nothing in return. The next few days passed like molasses. She didn't show up for work. No one knew where she was. Jack tried not to panic, but it gnawed at him. What if she didn't come back? What if she never forgave him? What if she disappeared the same way she once had appeared? Quietly, suddenly, completely. One night, he sat in the back office alone, a light drizzle tapping at the window. His phone buzzed. A message from one of the hostesses. Hey, I think I saw Haley earlier. She was running through the rain, looked panicked. Jack stood. His heart dropped. Something was wrong. He grabbed his coat and ran. By the time Jack reached the corner of Brighton and Ashford, the rain had thickened into sheets, blurring the streetlights into halos. His shoes slapped against the pavement, drenched each step, driven by instinct more than direction. He didn't know exactly where she was, but he knew where she would go. The alley, behind the boarded-up pharmacy, where the children waited. He turned the corner and stopped cold. Blue and red lights flashed softly across the wet bricks. An ambulance, its back doors wide open. 2 EMTs hovered over a small figure on a stretcher, tiny, unmoving. It was the boy, 6 years old, pale, lips tinged with blue. An oxygen mask too large for his delicate face covered his nose and mouth. And beside him, drenched shaking hair clinging to her cheeks, was Haley. Her hands were wrapped tightly around his. Her soaked coat hung off her shoulders. Her eyes, red, swollen, hollow, were locked onto the child like he was her entire world. Jack took a step forward but stopped when a man in a lab coat emerged from the building. A doctor. He spoke gently to Haley, but Jack could hear the words like thunder. I'm sorry, ma'am. Without proof of guardianship, we can't proceed with further treatment. Consent has to come from a legal adult with authority. Haley's voice cracked as she said, I am his adult. He has no one else. No parents, no file, just me. The doctor softened, but his words didn't. I understand. But our hands are tied. Haley turned back to the boy, her forehead resting against his hand, whispering something Jack couldn't hear. It was a prayer, a promise, a plea. Jack stepped out of the shadows, eyes wide, chest burning. I'll sign. Everyone turned. The doctor startled. Haley stunned. Jack walked forward, rain dripping down his forehead, hair-soaked shirt clinging to his frame. But there was no power in his presence. No CEO, no empire, just a man desperate to help. I'll take responsibility, he said. Get whoever you need. I'll sign. I'll cover everything. Just help him, please. Haley stood, her voice trembling. Jack, how did you... I asked around, he said, his voice hoarse. You didn't show for your shift. Someone saw you running. I followed the storm. The doctor nodded, then stepped back inside. Within minutes, a private physician arrived. Paperwork was drawn up. Jack signed it without blinking. The boy was given an IV, his oxygen-adjusted vitals monitored, and then, finally, silence. The beeping of monitors slowed. The child breathed, shallow but steady. Haley collapsed into the plastic chair beside the bed, every part of her slumped in exhaustion. Her clothes still dripped, forming a small puddle at her feet. Jack didn't speak. He simply lowered himself into the chair next to her, not touching her, not crowding her, just present. Time passed. Nurses came and went. Machines hummed softly, but neither of them left the room. At some point, Haley's hand slipped from her lap, grazing the armrest between them. Without thinking, Jack reached out and took it, not as a savior, not as a hero, just as someone who understood. She didn't pull away. She didn't speak. But in that simple silent contact, something shifted. Something let go. And in that moment, with the storm still tapping against the hospital window, Haley exhaled for the first time in what felt like days. Jack turned toward her eyes, soft. "I never meant to deceive you," he said, voice cracking. "But I was afraid that if you knew who I really was, you'd look at me like everyone else does." She didn't answer, so he added, "You once gave me bread." Haley turned, brows furrowed. "I want to give you every sunrise I have left." Her eyes filled, but not with disbelief, with understanding, because maybe this wasn't about status, or power, or betrayal. Maybe it was about showing up, again, and again, and again. They sat there until dawn. When the child's color returned and his fingers curled gently around Haley's, when the fear slowly began to fade, and in that quiet room filled with fluorescent light and second chances, Jack didn't feel like a CEO. He felt like the boy on the bridge, who had been saved once. By her, weeks passed. The boy, his name was Leo, recovered slowly, one careful step at a time. Haley was there every day, brushing his hair with her fingers, reading to him from tattered library books, humming lullabies no one else remembered. Jack came too, quietly without fanfare. Not as Jack Delaney, the restaurant mogul, just Jack. He didn't try to fix everything. He simply stood in it with her, and that made all the difference. One morning, Haley returned to her small apartment to find something slip beneath her door. An envelope, cream-colored thick, with her name written in elegant script. She opened it slowly, not knowing what to expect. Inside was a letter, and when she read the first line, her knees gave out. It was a full-ride scholarship, Bachelor of Social Work, all tuition, housing, books, and living expenses covered. Recommended personally by Jack Delaney. She sat on the floor of the hallway letter, clutched to her chest like a lifeline. Later that evening, she showed up at Jack's office. Not the restaurant, but the towering glass building with his name on the directory in Midtown. She held the letter in her trembling hands, stepping into the reception area like someone walking into a world she wasn't sure she was allowed to belong to. Jack came out to meet her before the assistant could even call his name. When their eyes met, she didn't say anything at first, just held the letter up and asked softly, "What is this?" Jack approached slowly. "I started it for you," he said. She blinked. "A scholarship." He shook his head. "A door. I watched what you did with scraps, Haley. Leftovers, kindness no one else noticed. I couldn't stop thinking. If this is what you do with nothing, what could you do with support?" She stared at him. "I didn't ask for this," she said, voice small. Jack nodded. "I know. That's why you deserve it." A few weeks later, another envelope arrived, this one by email. Subject line, "Haley's tomorrow. Executive appointment." Attached was a letter from the Delaney Foundation. They were launching a new initiative, a citywide program for at-risk youth single caregivers and underfunded shelters. The position of co-director, offered to Haley. The program's name, Haley's Tomorrow. She sat in stunned silence in the corner of the community library, reading the email again and again as if it might disappear. When she confronted Jack, this time not with anger, but with trembling curiosity, he was in the middle of a meeting. She waited outside, letter printed and folded in her jacket pocket. When he saw her, he dismissed the room. She stepped in slowly, then held the page up again. "Jack, what is this?" He smiled, but not in the way she expected. Not smug, not showy, just sincere. "I meant what I said," he replied. "You've always had the heart. Now you'll have the tools." Haley's eyes filled. "You've always lived up high," she whispered. Jack met her gaze. "And I'm still learning how to trust the ground." She didn't laugh, didn't cry. She just nodded. Because it was true. The space between them wasn't gone, not yet. They were still different in so many ways. But the difference didn't feel like a wall anymore. It felt like a bridge, something they could walk across one careful step at a time. Before she left, Jack took a step back, giving her room. "This isn't pressure," he said. "If you want the job, it's yours. If you don't, the program still carries your name, because you made it matter. Whether you're at a podium or a park bench, you've already changed more lives than I ever could." Haley stood there, letter still pressed to her chest. For the first time in a long time, the ground beneath her didn't feel like it would collapse. And maybe, just maybe, she was allowed to dream again. 1 year later, the ballroom of the Delaney Foundation shimmered. Not with chandeliers or glittering jewels, but with something quieter, warmer, hope. Haley had insisted on keeping it simple. No velvet ropes, no red carpet, just long wooden tables, flickering candles, and framed photos lining the walls. Children laughing, volunteers hugging single moms, smiling through tears of joy. The first annual gala for Haley's Tomorrow had drawn a full house. Donors, city officials, teachers, caseworkers, and hundreds of faces who had been touched by the program's reach. But the only thing Haley could focus on was the speech in her trembling hands. Backstage, she stood still, trying to steady her breath. Jack waited a few feet away, dressed in a simple charcoal suit, hands in his pockets, giving her space. No pressure, just presence. "You've already done the hard part," he said gently. "Just tell them what's true." She nodded, throat tight. Her name was announced. Applause rose, but it wasn't loud. It was reverent. As she stepped into the light, something in the room shifted. Hundreds of people watched as she took the podium. This woman, who once wrapped cold bread in napkins and whispered comfort under alleyway rain. Now she stood tall, strong, glowing beneath the soft amber stage lights. Haley looked out at the crowd, then down at her speech, and slowly, she let it fall to the side. She didn't need it. "I used to bring bread," she began, voice quiet, steady, wrapped in napkins, carried in a torn bag, because that's all I had. A few slices, a little warmth, and a promise that I'd show up again the next night. She paused. "And honestly, I thought that was all I had to give." She looked out again, at the tables, at the kids now, clean, healthy, sitting beside their caregivers, at the social workers now funded, at the shelters now expanded, at the little lives that had changed not because of donations, but because someone showed up with bread and stayed long enough to matter. "Today," she said, her voice strengthening, "I bring hope." The audience rose to their feet in silence. No cheers, no whoops, just the soft rustle of hundreds standing together for something sacred. Haley stepped back from the mic. That's when she saw him. Jack was walking toward her from the front of the stage, not alone. In each hand he held the tiny fingers of 2 children, Leo and Maya, now dressed in small suits and dresses, wide-eyed and beaming. Haley's hand flew to her mouth. She dropped to her knees as they reached her, pulling them into her arms. She kissed their foreheads, tears falling freely, her dress wrinkling beneath them as she held on like she'd never let go. Then Jack knelt beside her. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small black box. He didn't open it like a proposal. He opened it like a memory. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a silver necklace, delicate and understated, with a simple inscription. "Tomorrow is still a gift." Jack's voice was low but steady. "You saved me once," he said, eyes shimmering. "And I've spent every day since trying to live in a way that would make that moment worth it." He took a breath, eyes locked on hers. "Let me spend the rest of my life deserving it." Haley's lips trembled. She didn't answer with words. She reached into the inner pocket of her blazer and pulled out something wrapped in yellowing tissue paper. Slowly, she unfolded it. It was a piece of old bread, hardened, preserved. The same bread she had given to a stranger on a bridge 5 years ago. "I kept it," she whispered, "in case I ever saw you again." The crowd didn't erupt. They didn't have to. They just stood, some with hands over hearts, some wiping away tears, as Jack reached forward and gently touched his forehead to hers. Haley pressed the pendant to her chest and nodded. It wasn't a grand declaration. It was something deeper. A yes, lived not spoken. To love, to hope, to all the tomorrows they once thought they'd never see. Some stories don't end with fireworks. They don't fade out on diamond rings or sweeping orchestras. Some stories end with presence, with two people choosing to show up when it matters most, again and again, even when everything else feels broken. Jack and Haley's story wasn't born out of perfection. It was built from scraps of time, of bread of hope, a moment on a bridge, a whisper in the dark, a child fed beneath a storm-dripped awning, and a truth discovered too late, but not too late to heal. In a world obsessed with grand gestures, their love was made in the quiet places, in a shared silence at the end of a shift, in a plastic hospital chair at 3 a.m., in a foundation built not to save, but to empower. And it all began with 5 words. Tomorrow is still a gift. For Haley, they were a lifeline. For Jack, they were a second chance. For the world watching them, they became a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness echo the loudest, and that love, when it finally arrives, not with roses or promises, but with understanding, is the kind that stays. So, if you're carrying something heavy today, if you've forgotten the worth of your own breath, if the night feels too long, remember someone once handed a piece of bread to a stranger and changed 100 lives. Maybe the one you save will be your own.